Next, on Currents News, strong reactions are flooding into accusations that many priests abuse children in Pennsylvania. The latest is next. A frantic search is underway at this hour, and the death toll is rising after a massive bridge collapse in Italy. The Pope is praying for the victims. A remarkable journey into the history of America's civil rights movement. A Brooklyn priest will be here to discuss it with me. Plus, a miraculous device that now allows a teenager to see. The news starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. There's been a wave of reaction to the report out of Pennsylvania about clerical sex abuse. Survivors and bishops are speaking out after a grand jury accused more than 300 priests of abusing over 1,000 children.
What do you tell an institution that teaches morality but has none?
Victims like Sean Doherty are speaking publicly about the 300 Pennsylvania Catholic priests who have been accused by a grand jury of sexually abusing more than 1,000 children.
I am at peace. I'm a veteran of the Navy. I felt obligated in the 90s to speak up.
The report says priests were raping boys and girls, with church leadership protecting and even promoting the attackers.
I don't understand how an organization has more say and more sway in the state that I swore to defend than I do. So there's a bill in the Pennsylvania State House being debated now, and that could bring justice.
Because of the state statute of limitations,
almost every instance of child sexual abuse we found is too old to be prosecuted.
But not every instance. One priest in Greensburg pleaded guilty to sexually abusing a 7-year-old boy. And the only other case...
In Erie, we charged Father David Paulson with sexually abusing one boy for 8 years. He actually made the boy go to confession to admit his sins.
The Pennsylvania House will vote next month on whether to eliminate the criminal statute of limitations. The grand jury also proposed a civil window law, which would allow older victims more time to sue for abuse they suffered as children. We're also getting reaction tonight from Pennsylvania's bishops to the report, and they are humble and apologetic. Bishop Alfred Sklert is the leader of the Allentown Diocese.
I apologize to the survivors of abuse and their loved ones for the times when the Church did not live up to her call to holiness and did not do what needed to be done. I apologize.
Looking back, we should have known better and done better, but we didn't.
Pittsburgh Bishop David Zubik said apologies and sorrow are not enough. Continued action is necessary. His brother bishop in Harrisburg, Ronald Gaynor, said the church will continue to make amends for the sins of the past. Crux senior correspondent Elise Harris is also covering this story. She's standing by in Rome. Elise, thank you so much for joining us and helping us unpack this very complicated issue. From your listening post, what are you hearing from the Vatican? Any public response to the grand jury report from the Pope?
Not yet. You know, the Pope today was talking a lot about the feast of the Annunciation of Mary, and so he was celebrating that feast, and then he was offering prayers for this bridge collapse we had in Genoa yesterday. It was a huge tragedy, and so far almost 40 people have passed away. So far he hasn't said anything about this report specifically, but we know that he constantly talks about the topic of sexual abuse and clergy abuse, and he's been very insistent, especially in the last few months, on kind of cracking down on that, as we've seen in his actions in Chile, and as we've seen with him taking the red hat away from the former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. So we know that he's serious about this issue, and one thing I think we can be sure of is, the grand jury, before publishing this report, sent it to church officials in May so that they could have a chance to review the content and challenge any aspects that they wanted to. And so I'm pretty sure that the Pope probably received it at the same time in May, when the rest of the dioceses got their copy. I'm pretty sure the Pope received it and that he's aware of what the report says, and whether he says anything or not, he has not at this point, and he might in the future, but so far, we know, I can guarantee he's at least aware.
Okay, Elise, speaking of church officials, Albany Bishop Edward Scharfenberger said lay people should have a larger role when it comes to sex abuse allegations. Now, the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which is one of the most comprehensive yet, was compiled by lay people. Should they become more involved?
I think that's a big question. I think it's a good question. I think it's something that a lot of people have brought up in recent months and in recent years, is that if clergy abuse is an institutional problem where we're kind of defending one another, maybe lay people should get involved. And I think that's something that many people have been asking for. And I think it's not just one or two people. It's a lot of people saying that, maybe the lay people are the ones that can kind of, ensure that accountability takes place, because in a sense they're outside of the system and they have more resources in that sense to hold clergy accountable at times, but also they have professional skills, they have the training, and so I think it's something we can anticipate them, as we've seen in this report and as we've seen in others, taking a greater role in this topic moving forward.
When we talk about change and transformation, Elise, let's talk about the U.S. Bishop's Charter for the Protection of Children. It's highly regarded as one of the best, and it's been copied by many, but since its creation in 2002, it has been revised, but does it need an update?
I think that's a very good question as well, and that's something we can probably expect to see. After the scandals came out with Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, one of the things that was noted about the charter is that it remains at a diocesan level, and there are questions as to whether we want to take this to a next step, maybe to a national level or in terms of the universal level. And we don't know, if that's going to happen, but I think it's certainly one thing that people are looking at right now. And Cardinal Wuerl has released several statements about this issue, about in wake of the McCarrick scandals, and in even the Pennsylvania report, he's released statements. But on the McCarrick scandal, one of the things he said is that there was, a bishop's statement. They released a statement of their own commitment after the charter was published, and he said one of the things that needs to be revised is that own statement from the bishops in terms of greater accountability. And so people are already looking at these documents, I think, with that same question in mind. What's next? What is the next thing we can do to ensure that children are safe?
Elise, really quickly, and we're not making excuses here, but the grand jury investigation identified 2 Pennsylvania clergy involved in wrongdoing. 2 are too many, and it should be 0, but it is a drastic decline from the awful numbers decades ago. Are the actions being taken to prevent clerical abuse in the U.S. working? Really quickly.
The report actually addressed this, and it said despite all of the scandals we've seen in the past, and while setting the historical records straight is important, it said that after speaking with all 6 dioceses, progress has been made. They said in the past 15 years, since we've seen the majority of these scandals coming out, they said there has been a change in the church, that we're going to law enforcement and we're making children safer.
All right, Elise, thank you so much. I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you, Liz.
Father Edward Beck is a Crux contributor on issues of faith, religion, and ethics, and he points out that the U.S. Church has been taking action to battle clerical sex abuse.
There's certainly now in the Catholic Church safeguards in place. There is mandatory reporting. Priests are removed from ministry. So I do not believe the problem exists as it once did. However, do we still have further to go? Yes. But I think there's been vast improvement.
Father Beck believes the improvements will continue, and in his words, we won't be talking about this ever again in the near future. In the Brooklyn Diocese, there are many important measures in place to prevent abuse. The Office of Victim Assistance helps individuals who come forward with allegations of abuse. The office provides counseling, referrals for therapy, and other resources. Every employee of the diocese, including students, undergo mandatory training to prevent and identify abuse. Bishop DiMarzio meets with survivors and listens to their requests, and the diocese holds a yearly Mass of Hope and Healing, which they suggested. Christ is being torn down in China. Posters of the Lord ripped from walls by communist police. Catholics in the country have long been targeted by Beijing. Now images of Jesus are being replaced with photos of President Xi Jinping. As the numbers of Christians in China increase, the persecution of the faith becomes more severe, with churches demolished and priests arrested. Tonight, the tragic toll is rising with more than 36 dead, and rescue workers are digging through tons of rubble to save survivors after a major bridge collapse in Italy. Ian Lee is standing by with the latest from Genoa.
This still very much is a search and rescue mission. We spoke with the chief of fire services, and he told us that there still could be a handful of people trapped inside that rubble. Let me step aside and show you what we're looking at here. There you have two large cranes that are trying to work with this mound of twisted steel and concrete. Some of these chunks of concrete are the size of a 3-4 story building. We're hearing jackhammers trying to pick it apart to find anyone who could still be trapped, although they haven't found anyone today who's been alive. When this section of the highway fell, they say about 35 cars were on there. Right now, that death toll is still thought to continue to rise. 15 people have been injured, and you can also see the cars that barely missed flying off that ledge there. They are just stacked there, and it just shows just how busy this highway was at the time. They don't know quite yet all the nationalities of the people who have been killed and injured. They say the majority are Italian nationals. But this is a bridge, they say, that has had a lot of problems in the past over decades, over the last 3 decades. In fact, they say that locals have pointed out structural flaws to this bridge. They said it was dangerous. Even up to last month, they petitioned the government saying that this bridge is just too dangerous to use. Well, today, many of those locals, 440 of them, are evacuated from their homes because this bridge still could collapse further. Ian Lee in Genoa.
Pope Francis is offering prayers for the victims of this tragedy in Genoa. The Holy Father praying that our Heavenly Mother obtain comfort, courage, and serenity for all, especially those affected by the bridge collapse. He invited everyone listening to join him in praying the Hail Mary for the victims and their families. It was a bittersweet day in Parkland, Florida, as the doors reopened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. The students returned to campus to start a new school year 6 months after the deadly shooting that claimed the lives of 17 people and wounded 17 more. The school district is offering counselors, social workers, behavior therapists, and therapy dogs to the students. There's a lot more news headed your way. A civil rights road trip. The Brooklyn priest who made the trek will be here next. And prayers for the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. A pastor talks about how she saved his church. Tonight, a Brooklyn priest is recalling a powerful journey he has now just completed, a road trip as the nation remembers the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King 50 years ago. Currents News' Tim Harfman reports.
Riverside Church was the final stop on Father John Gribowicz's road trip to explore the American civil rights movement. The Brooklyn priest started the journey in the South and finished it at the spot where Dr. Martin Luther King delivered a famous speech.
He wanted to show that what he was a part of within the civil rights movement was that it was a movement for human dignity on all levels and all forms.
Dr. King stood in the sanctuary of the church nearly 50 years ago and spoke out against the Vietnam War.
He recognized that economic injustice and war were both things that did great damage.
Father John devoted a good part of his summer on the road, studying Dr. King and other moments of civil rights history.
As the saying goes, every 1,000-mile journey begins with the first step.
Father John spent weeks in the South, traveling the Civil Rights Trail, Atlanta, Nashville, New Orleans, Little Rock, Birmingham, and Memphis, to name a few. The adventure captured on his smartphone, but Father John's emotions couldn't be expressed with emojis.
Extremely powerful. I mean, I will say that. I did feel like I personally was on a pilgrimage.
The image that stood out the most to him, the bridge that hundreds of protesters marched across in Selma, Alabama.
It's such an iconic symbol of the civil rights movement, of people crossing essentially from slavery into freedom, right? I mean, it has almost a biblical parallel to crossing of the Red Sea.
But Father John says protests like in Charlottesville, Virginia, are sad reminders that racial unity is an elusive goal in the United States.
We are under this illusion that we think that we've moved beyond racial prejudice and discrimination, but the very fact that we think we moved on just makes it even worse.
Decades ago, Dr. King preached nonviolence.
We have further agreed to call off demonstrations while the committee seeks to work out a settlement.
Today, after traveling the Civil Rights Trail, Father John believes Americans must do more to achieve racial harmony.
I think there should be an opening for understanding and compassion that could open up between people who are white and people of color.
In Manhattan, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
And Father John joins us now. We're going to go very deeply into this road trip. We're going to get your personal impressions of it, personal experiences, personal revelations. Let's start right away because there's so much to unpack. Beginning with Dr. Martin Luther King, of course, right? He was a towering figure in the civil rights movement, but there were other leaders before him. During and after Reverend King's public career, many of them adopted very different approaches, but he is seen as the saint and martyr of the movement. To concentrate solely on him, though, are we doing ourselves a disservice here?
Well, I think it is a big disservice simply because there were just so many people that make up a movement to begin with, right? And I think when we just house the whole thing under the ideas of Martin Luther King, we forget the fact that King himself participated in a long line of really prophetic people since the time of the Civil War and really prior to that, and which continues today. There are many of us still look at Martin Luther King with his prophetic vision of what humanity should be, and we're inspired by him. So it is a disservice for us to just kind of historically pin it based on his public life.
We talk about your personal experience here, your personal revelations. Was there anything that really stood out to you as you made this journey? Did you ever stop and say, man, I've had it wrong all this time?
Yeah, I think for me, it just brought me to the point of recognizing the fact that as a white person, right, I've gone through my life white. That's all I know. And I love history, so that was probably one reason why I went to revisit all this. But now as a priest, and more importantly, just as a Christian, I've tried so hard to try to be so accepting and loving of other people, to realize I don't understand their story. But there's one thing I can say, and this was brought with much clarity from this time, is just that the one thing I will not understand about a person of color is simply being a person of color. All right? It's just like I will not understand what it means to have my own children or what it means to be a woman or a mother, right? That is something that I will never be able to experience. So I can't just assume that I understand what it means to be a person of color. And I think that's very difficult. But you know enough
to have the conversation, and do you think that is the best starting point to ease tensions that we've been seeing?
I definitely think that's a great starting point. Because I think in an age now where we're kind of almost fearing that there's reverse discrimination of some sort, I mean, discrimination on any level by anyone is just wrong, right? But I think that what it boils down to is that what brought Martin Luther King to the forefront and what made him so successful was that he understood that the movement had to rest on reclaiming a spiritual identity, each one of us.
Dr. King and others.
Yes.
I have to get this in, Father, while we're here. The civil rights movement has spiritual undertones.
Right.
We can't argue that. God created every human being with equal dignity. What happens when the civil rights movement departs from that, or when we as human beings depart from that thinking?
Well, it's us shifting our identity on something else. It could be just what we think we are good at, what we think our physical attributes are about. And when we start to rest our identity on something that's human and not divine, that's when we run into problems. And the reality is that our only identity that matters, and we understand this fully as Christians, is that we are sons and daughters, beloved sons and daughters of a loving Father. And we experience that in and through the person of Jesus. And King knew that, and that's what gave him a gravitas to recognizing that any type of societal practice or any type of human law is always subject to a divine law, because it's not just a law you're following, it's an identity that you claim to because it is your identity. So I think if there's one thing that we can all learn from the civil rights movement, is for us to once again reclaim our true identity as beloved sons and daughters.
Father John, I hate to have to say this, we are out of time, but we have to continue this conversation at another point. There's so much more to learn. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. Always great being here.
Prayers are being said tonight for the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, as news of her ailing health spreads and family and friends come to her side. At her hometown church in Detroit, worshipers gathered to pray for her. The church, New Bethel Baptist, is where Aretha got her start. Pastor Robert Smith praised her for keeping the church alive.
She's the lifeblood of New Bethel Baptist Church. Without her, I would think that the church would have had to close down many years ago. But we've been able to stay in this community and survive because of her benevolence.
Aretha's father actually founded New Bethel Baptist Church. Still to come on Currents News, underwater cameras are there as Chilean Navy divers struggle to free a whale tangled in a net. And she is legally blind, but tonight her life is very different. The story of how different it is coming up. We'll be right back. A whale trapped in a fishing net was rescued from the high seas thanks to the Chilean Navy. The mammal was stuck in the seas of the Patagonia region, the poor thing so tangled in the net it could not move. Navy divers took turns swimming next to it, using knives to cut around the net that trapped it. After over an hour, the whale was finally freed and managed to swim away. And finally tonight, the story of a young woman with vision, but not in the way you may be thinking. A legally blind Texas teen set her limited sights on a brighter future, and thanks to a miraculous device and the generosity of others, she now sees the world. Erin Jones reports.
It's been almost 2 years since Shay Busby was told she'd never see clearly again.
And then I had to accept that because there's nothing you can do.
She was diagnosed with Stargardt, a rare disease that caused part of her retina to deteriorate.
And they're like, you will be like this for the rest of your life.
But a couple weeks ago, she learned about $10,000 glasses that allow the legally blind to see. She started a crowdfunding campaign and shared her story, hoping North Texans would help.
And then once you shared the story, there were people that just came out of the woodwork. Every donation that came in, I'm telling you, I've had tears going like crazy because this is the good stuff.
Shay raised enough money for the eSight glasses, and now her friend, who is also legally blind, has a surprise.
Oh my God.
In less than 2 weeks,
Wow, that's really weird.
Shay's dream is coming true.
You have really pretty eyes. Hi, Padre.
Hey, sweetheart. Can you see my face?
Yeah.
She sees her mom and dad clearly for the first time in 2 years.
How excited she is, just definitely it warms my heart.
It's hasn't fully sunk in yet, because it's kind of a miracle.
She's overwhelmed, enjoying moments many take for granted.
Oh, so true. Shay's story really does make you appreciate the gift of sight. The rechargeable eSight glasses have this high-speed, high-definition camera that captures what the user's looking at, enhances the video feed, and displays the video in front of the user's eyes. Oh, technology, what a blessing. That is Currents News. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liz Faublas. Set your DVR to record this program so that you never miss it, because we are putting your faith in the news. I hope to see you again next time.